manner, just like everything else, right?
Well,
So
I think that's a perfect transition. Let's talk about that, because again, you've been in thousands of funeral homes. Your wife works in a funeral home. I believe you're actually working on designing and building what you think is the future of the funeral home business. And then you've also consulted with thousands of funeral homes across the country. So when someone passes away, the family comes in, because I hear this a lot from people go, oh, well, when my grandpa died, they gave us 60 days to pay. They're like, we go to church together. It's fine. Don't worry about it. Whenever you get the money, you get the money. Was that true? And then what is the reality today and why?
yeah, so like being from Detroit, there's a saying, it's not your daddy's Oldsmobile anymore, right? So
Right.
And times have changed. Extension of this person has gone to my parish for 50 years and their family is, we live across the street from each other. Those days of giving 30 days, 60 days, 90 days, expenses have gone up tremendously for businesses. Cash flow just is critical now for businesses, as all the things that continue to pile up in terms of expenses that didn't exist years ago, along with efficiencies. But we have entities like corporations in funeral service that own thousands and thousands of funeral homes nationally.
Like big, giant conglomerates.
Yeah.
Like just buying up many funeral homes.
Yeah, there's a huge wave right now of both independent guys like myself and large corporations where, there's a lot of baby boomers in our industry that are looking to retire. So, the corporations are there. They have been for a long time. They're looking to grow just like everybody else. They don't do a bad job. They just are looking to grow, right? But they expect, because they are publicly traded, to have services paid for prior to services in almost all cases, right? Before anything moves forward. Where you're going to find family-owned funeral homes may be a little bit more flexible on payment, but not so much anymore. Al, the local funeral director who owns a place downtown, just as it is important for the corporations, it's just as important for Al to be able to pay his part-time, pay his bills to the casket company. So he is asking for payment promptly by the time of service, more than likely. And sometimes the scenario that I see often is, well, mom has this MetLife policy and she's had it for years and we're not really sure if it's still valid. And, so now all of a sudden, they're telling us they're going to pay the funeral home 6 months from now. And the funeral home has a decision to make, which most of them are saying, we'll help you file the claim, but we need to be compensated now. And you can reimburse yourself with that policy, which doesn't feel good it's not a good process for anyone. Right. And mom didn't intend for that policy to go that way. She expected those funds to be available. It wasn't designed to be that way. And those funds 6 months down the road will be very helpful. But where the family needs the most help is right now with the funeral director and the expenses that come along with not just the funeral home, but everything else that we can talk about in a later segment that come along with funeral care, cemeteries, outside expenses, luncheons, travel expenses, death certificates, obituaries that are all outside expenses of the funeral home. So that's the timeliness of payment and the pressure that families feel. And that is quite honestly the most awkward conversations for these last responders, as we'll call them, the funeral directors, because nobody loves having that conversation in our profession either. Who is going to, the average funeral in the United States, together cremation, burial, falls right around $7,500. So it's not
these funeral homes are in sales. Let's not,
sure.
Because if they do a good job for, again, we're going to say the family,
then
they're more likely to get repeat business, which is
absolutely
the goal is how do you get these families to continue to use you? And if they're having to have these awkward conversations, it's definitely not because they want to, it's because they have to.
That's it. So exceptional service where you're hitting each mark and exceeding the expectations of things that they didn't even think existed is like really where my mind goes in terms of how we outperform people in service and be specific on those service items. But if and when I own a funeral home, I would expect payment because I'm busting my butt for that family and my heart is all in it. And just like when you have a great experience with, and I'm not correlating, going to a fantastic resort with your family. And yes, you could put that on a credit card and pay over time. But you can do that with funeral homes now too,
Right.
to go to for a vacation, for an experience. And I realize that we have to make this more of an experience for families. And that's what we're working on in funeral service. But we also need prompt payment. BLP opens the door, and we need more people to go through that door and realize, like you said, because they have the funds. It's not like mom hasn't planned financially for death. It's just moving from one pocket to the other so it's accessible to them and the funeral director for the services that mom has expressed she wanted,
Well, people
right?
just don't realize that the money's not available.
Right.
So I look at myself as an educator, spreading the word that, hey, your plan isn't going to work.
Right.
And guess what? Great news. It doesn't cost you anything to fix it. That's the best part.
True. And sometimes the beast doesn't rear its ugly head until you're in the arrangement. Like, it's the sister-in-law in the back of your head that you're like, this is going to be a problem, and she's at every family decision-making process. And now it's, well, mom said this, and well, mom said this. And,
Right.
there's, and now it's a question of what do we spend? How do we spend it? So that's why equally, and we're, guys like you and I with Great Lakes and BLP coming together and is also talking about having some of those choices made that we as a group can help folks. Like as a funeral director, if they call me directly and say, hey, John, like what do you recommend in terms of cost for these types of services? We're going to be able to say, you set aside this much. This is why. This is what's going to happen on average, coast to coast, wherever you end up.
Right.
And having those funds available, because like I said, that beast will rear its ugly head in arrangement rooms when it comes to what to spend, how to spend it. And again, I have never been someone that will die on the hill of trying to sell merchandise in funeral service. I educate on what each product is, let the family make the decision based on what information they have. But a lot of times people don't know, they're trying to make emotional decisions. They might spend more than they need to because they're, just trying to make decisions on the fly.
So
with
like
their
mom deserves the best casket.
right.
Next thing I know, they got a $25,000 funeral service.
And maybe she does, right? Maybe she only drove red Cadillacs, and she had the finest mahogany furniture, and maybe it made sense for mom to be in a mahogany, and that's what she wanted. Maybe that service is $25,000 because I've seen that, but I've also seen that room when they're like, okay, well, they have the money, but it's like, who's going to front the 25 grand
Right.
to be reimbursed? So down to the family that says, look, mom was really simple. She didn't want anything. She wants cremation. We're going to honor her life at the beach. And funeral director's like, yeah, we're going to help you with that too. And that's going to be, $4,500. We're big swing in costs, but people are still looking around. It's $4,500. It's not every day you go out and drop $4,500 or 25 grand. So being prepared for that, which is completely avoidable, like we said, is huge right now, more than ever.
Well, let's go back to the corporations buying these funeral homes nationally.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know this for a fact, so I'm kind of asking you. This is what I think is happening. These corporations are smart. They don't brand it Best Buy Funeral Home and have these franchise names. They realize that people want to go to the local funeral home. So if it's Bob Jones Funeral Home, guess what? Bob Jones Funeral Home may be bought by Best Buy Funeral gazillion-dollar corporation.
Mm-hmm.
And Bob Jones might still work there because he has a phase-out program.
Yep.
So in the community, they may not know that their local funeral home is owned by these large corporations and has kind of a zero flexibility policy on what they're able to do.
Yeah, I think, you're right. They're smart. They are, because they're corporate doesn't make them, bad people, and that they're serving the community in a bad way. But you're right. There are more purchases being made by corporations, and there are several of them across the U.S. and some that are publicly traded and some that are not. But short answer is yes. They are the probably most like the biggest sticklers on timely payment. And they will not back away from that because they need and have to show revenue, right? It's part of, revenue to Service Corporation International quarterly is different to Bob Jones Funeral Home, who has been in business for 40 years. And
right. He's privately held, and it just affects his bottom line, not
right.
All the shareholders.
Yep. And like I said before, funeral services changed, right? So 40 years ago, 30 years ago, even 20 years ago, it was a business where families sat down. They were very connected to a church, a parish, some sort of faith, right? So a majority of people buried their dead. Cremation was just starting to creep in terms of a solution for families. Now, in the state of Michigan, we're well over 50%, not quite 60, but we're getting there and climbing. So, conversations with families on choice of disposition, which is cremation, burial, entombment. They have their first basically natural burial, like a natural decomposing process out in Washington that was approved. So where we could talk about that process later and not to get you too sick over a Zoom, but the reality is like the game has changed, right? People are less churched. The consumer is a little bit more demanding in terms of experience and what are you going to provide. The loyalty factor is drops among funeral brands because maybe there's a new funeral home in town. Maybe they just are going to go against the grain that their mom always went to this funeral home, so we're going to go to this funeral home. So maybe it's bought by a corporation, right? And the tide shifts.
Aren't there like some third-party consultants that families hire that kind of manage a lot of that, and then
like death doulas almost. Yeah, like death doulas, right? So like the consumer,
like a party planner kind of.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess that's where we, like guys like you and I and our organizations, can hopefully, based on our experience, both what you've seen and what I've seen, and every day people dying. And I would say the biggest thing, like you said, is the timeliness and the amount of emotion it can remove by having a financial plan. Simplest of cremations to the most traditional, like you said, if it's that glitzy funeral with the most expensive casket and the price tag ends up being $25,000, even if they have the money, have the plan, have the financial plan. That just takes a lot of it's that vacuum period that we talked about where we can remove it.